Something nice about lighting things with fire. I've always enjoyed striking matches and lighting fires and lighting cigarettes and pipes and having fire in my pocket. Um, and you have to use it as well. I don't know, it's a beautiful thing to light a fire, I think. And, now it's mainly going to be illegal in England in National Trust properties. There's signs everywhere: no fires, do not barbecue, you know, no barbecues, nothing at all can be done, except certain designated places in Italy. At least they had those. I don't know of them in England, but in Italy, in the mountains, there would be a designated place. Only in the most frequented areas, of course. Well, there are reasons for it. I understand that, especially when it's woodland, because people can be foolish. And many, many years ago, my wife was foolish. I'd made, we'd bought a house up in the mountains, um, which was an absolute economic disaster. It was hard to buy a house and lose money in those days, but we managed it. Um, because I only realized after buying the place that there was no road that led to it. I hadn't really been very diligent myself. I mean, it wasn't my money, in fairness. It was my wife's, and she was foolish, and I didn't lead, and I just really didn't understand. I had no idea about the property market. The time that I did this, you could buy an attic in town for about the same money that we spent on this little tumble down house in the mountains, a very small place. And an attic in town today would probably be worth, serious money, 300 or 400,000 euros. Whereas the place that I bought is probably just fallen down in a ruin and worth nothing. Well, I didn't buy it, my wife bought, I should say. And we gave the money to the notary. The notary's fee was almost as much as the cost of the house. And it was overgrown, and there was all sorts of brush to clear from around it. We had an idea that we were going to somehow reclaim it, but I didn't know how much it costs to do those sorts of things, especially when there's no road. There were three landowners before we reaching the main road, I discovered afterwards, and all of them were willing to sell the right of way. But each of those would have been a legal procedure, and a notary would have to be paid, and deeds would have to be drawn up, and the cost would be prohibitive, not to mention how much each landowner asked. Um, if you wanted to develop that house, you were obliged to do so, and I should have done it before. But the people who sold it, they owned a property on the route, and of course they freely drove to and from the house. But they were mainly driving tractors, whereas at that time my means of conveyance was a Morris Minor in Italy, one of the very few ones that ever reached Italy, an ex-post office van. And while it was fine, it could get down to the house in the summer months. The minute it started to rain or anything happened like that, you'd better get out quick. I mean, you needed a four-wheel drive, and in bad conditions, you would need a tractor. That was my fate in Italy. But it was a nice place, and I took my mother and father up there, and It could have been a nice place, shall we say. It wasn't really suitable, but we used to make a fire down in the bottom room, and we'd grill sausages and drink grappa, and just spending time in the mountains was pleasant. Although we were living in quite a dark place because the trees hadn't been cut back, it needed serious work. I was an absolute, they used to call them orca, a goose. When I turned up, I think the owners couldn't believe their good luck to see such stupid people willing to spend money on something that was worth nothing. But is it worth nothing? I mean, the experience was absolutely invaluable, of course. Um, Although, you know, our fortunes could have been sealed really if we'd bought a place in the city. And, you know, my wife would have been my ex-wife would have been far happier with her own place, I'm sure. Oh, it's ignorance and innocence. I was 26, 27, and I had no idea about anything really at all. And my wife even less, although she knew the area, but again, her head was full of conceit and very little practical understanding of the world. She'd been raised in that way. And we gathered a lot of brushwood. I worked for several hours, and the house was on an incline, of course, and there was a step cut into the side of the hill, and that's where the house sat. And so to go up into the field above the house was a bit of a climb at the side of the house, and there was a fairly flat field above it. Well, fairly flat. Still an incline, but it was negotiable. And that was the only place I could find to stack the wood to burn it. I wanted to get rid of it. But I understood that burning would be potentially dangerous, so that was away from trees. I'd made a pile, and my plan was to start a small fire and then feed it judiciously so that I could control the flames. And I was down in the house, and I heard a shout, and I went out, and my wife had just set fire to the whole pile of brushwood that I'd collected, which was quite a lot. And it caught very quickly, and fire started to spread across the grass and towards the trees and the dry undergrowth near them. And it suddenly looked as though we were on the verge of starting a forest fire. Or I don't know whether you could call it a forest, but quite a serious fire that would require the fire service. And that wasn't going to be easy, of course, because we were so far from the road. That was the only occasion that I can recall where I hated fire. We managed to put that out. I was absolutely terrified. Water was very difficult because water was only the house was on the mains, but carrying water from the house up to the fire site was extremely problematic because it was such a steep hill. I think it would have taken a full 5 minutes to get a bucket of water up there, and I just did it and did it and did it until I was almost dead with exhaustion. and then covering with blankets and stamping and all the rest of it, and eventually it was under control. I don't think my wife had my experience with fire. She'd behaved foolishly, and I mean, we all behave foolishly sometimes, but that was a very memorable experience. But apart from that, I like fire. You know, I mean, I'm not using my stove at the moment. I'm just using the gas, but the gas is burning. Um, my lantern is um, is burning here beside me, which is a nicer sort of light than the electric one. Um, I wish I could find some good mantle lanterns. They're very nice to have, but you know, electricity is so much more easy, so much easier and more practical. Um, I mean, I could just switch the light on in here. Why don't I? It just feels nicer somehow, and that's how I like it to be. God bless.